You're watching CBS News continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here's Charles Osgood and Susan Spencer.
And here are the headlines in our continuing coverage. Allied armor heads toward Kuwait. The missile war comes to Israel. A second U.S. plane is reported downed, and Iraq is bombarded for a second straight night. In Saudi Arabia, CBS News correspondents report columns of Allied armor and supplies are heading north, massing along the Kuwait border. And this could be the signal that a ground assault against the Iraqi troops in Kuwait is at hand. Also in the Saudi Arabian area, an American Patriot missile did its job, shooting down an incoming Iraqi Scud missile before that missile could deliver its deadly payload. But in Israel, Scud missiles, at least 8 of them, did get through. They were not armed with chemical weapons, as some had feared they might be, but a dozen people were injured, and the blast did cause considerable damage in Tel Aviv and in other areas on the Mediterranean coast. The Israeli cabinet has been called into emergency session to determine whether or not to retaliate. The world has also seen for the first time what the first night of Allied air attacks looked like in Baghdad. A production crew from the British ITN news service was there to see it happen.
But certainly the battle did light up the skies. The Iraqi ground defense systems, I think, were actually more pretty than effective. It's the first time I've seen a cruise missile land. I mean, it does light up the entire night sky, turn it into daylight. But as I say, the Iraqi defense systems were more pretty than effective.
A second American warplane is reported downed in the war, and the Pentagon has now identified the first American combat casualty. He is 33-year-old Navy Lieutenant Commander Michael Spiker, stationed aboard the USS Saratoga. His F-18 fighter bomber was shot down during the first wave of attacks on Iraq, and he is listed as missing in action.
Charlie, the White House never sleeps on occasions like this. Linda Tyra is standing by at the White House. Linda, can you bring us up to date?
Well, Susan, the White House has said that it will not have any comment on that emergency Israeli cabinet meeting until later in the day. The lights have been out for some time in the family residence of the White House, where President Bush has been since early last evening. Just to back up a bit, he had been told of the attack on Israel by his National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft. In the hours that followed, the White House issued 2 written statements in which the president expressed his outrage and condemned the attack on Israel. And also the White House said that Secretary of State James Baker had called from the White House to Israel. He talked with the Israeli Prime Minister and assured him that the U.S. and its partners in the Gulf would themselves conduct the military strikes to eliminate the Iraqi threat against Israel. Earlier in the day prior to that Iraqi attack, the president had said that he warned that there should not be any complacency here. He warned that these were the early hours of the conflict and that this would not be short or easy. It had been a very long day for President Bush. He had gotten up about before 5 o'clock in the morning, had shuttled between the Oval Office and the Situation Room, and had taken a brief stroll around on the south lawn of the White House. He also met with congressional leaders and with members of his cabinet before retiring to the family quarters. For today's schedule, it is again a schedule filled with intelligence and national security briefings, and also there is a visit to Camp David on the schedule, but the White House says no final decision has been made on whether the president will indeed go there. Sensitive, though, to perhaps some criticism that might erupt that the president would be seen leaving the White House for the weekend, White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater said that that Camp David has all the available sophisticated communications that might be needed by the president so that he can stay on top of the situation in the Gulf. Susan?
Well, Linda, you're talking about the schedule. I'm sure that what the White House wishes most of all is that it knew what the schedule was going to be. What would be the arguments in favor of his going to Camp David, just to show that everything was under control, that there was no sense of panic or whatever?
It would be pretty much to keep up with that perception. You will recall that last August, when Iraq first invaded Kuwait, that the president went ahead with his vacation and went up to Kennebunkport, but tried very hard to show he was on the phone with leaders from around the world. He had the King of Jordan and Saudi leaders come to visit him in Maine. That is what the president has been trying to show throughout this entire episode. He has, throughout this, tried to show that he is not a hostage to the White House. They very much want to keep up this image that everything here is under control, and the commander-in-chief is very much on top of the situation, that people can come to him, that he can continue to be briefed wherever he is.
Linda Tyra, thank you very much. We'll be back to you shortly, for Linda may feel like a hostage at the White House.
One matter of great concern to President Bush at the moment is whether or not Israel is going to retaliate for those Iraqi Scud missile that fell into Tel Aviv and to other areas along Israel's Mediterranean coast. Obviously, if Israel does retaliate, it could have a profound effect on the coalition. It could give the United States trouble in its dealings with its Arab coalition partners, especially with Saudi Arabia and Syria and others. Bill McLaughlin has a report now on what is going on as the Israeli cabinet meets to decide whether or not there should be a retaliation. Here's that report from Bill McLaughlin.
This working-class neighborhood in Tel Aviv suffered the most damage during the missile attacks. 5 houses were partially destroyed, leaving 80 families homeless. This man is mad because the explosion lifted his young sister out of her bed and hurled her through a window. But most of the 7 casualties suffered only light wounds.
Hopefully we'll be able to send them all home in a few hours.
The mayor of Tel Aviv, Shlomo Lahat, worked through the night with rescue crews. They also had to dig into craters to make sure the rubble did not hide any unexploded bombs.
A war is not a summer camp, and to my sorrow, people were wounded.
Missiles also hit the northern port city of Haifa, leaving superficial damage and very angry Israelis.
A crazy man, a crazy dictator.
Israel's civilian and military leaders are meeting to decide whether and how to strike back.
Clearly, we are not going to engage in any hasty decision.
Sources here say Israel will probably leave the retaliation to Washington. But if the Iraqi threat is not effectively eliminated by the U.S. Air Force, Israel warns it will make sure Saddam Hussein can never hit this country again. We've been hearing planes in the air in the last half hour, and a spokesman, IDF spokesman, that's the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli Army, are saying that Israel does still reserve the right to strike. They're insisting that Israel's hands are not tied. And I think really their message is that if the U.S. Air Force can't take care of the job, then the Israeli Air Force can.
Bill, is it considered a mitigating circumstance over there, the fact that nobody was killed and that the warheads were not chemical warheads? Is that of some importance in all of this?
Absolutely, because people like Prime Minister Shamir, among others, and any of the top military leaders, well before this missile attack took place, said that Israel's reaction would be gauged by the type of attack, the type of damage, and so on. I think, given the fact that this was not a chemical attack, given the fact that there are only 7 people wounded, despite the fact that Israelis are really angry about this, make no mistake of that, the level of attack probably will allow the government to permit the United States to take care of the immediate retaliation, while Israel reserves the right at some future point to let Iraq know that it's not at all happy with this.
There must be some over there, Bill, though, who are saying that, well, we listened to the United States, and at the urging of the other allies, we haven't launched any preemptive strikes, and they said that they would do everything that was necessary to take care of this. They did take out the fixed missile sites, Scud missile sites, but there are those mobile missile sites that they were not able to. Surely there must be some there now who are saying, well, you know, if you don't take care of yourself, you just can't leave it up to the other guy.
Well, that's been true in the past, although I must say that the big change here is that most Israelis in the military and political know, as it were very impressed and very surprised by the efficiency, the high technology of the American raid. One Israeli veteran of several wars told me, listen, it was a lot better than we did in the 6 Days War. Congratulations to the American Air Force. And the Israelis were aware, they were told by Washington, that some of the mobile missile launches were not hit, were missed, as it were, in that original raid. And the Israeli public knew that those missile launches weren't hit. They were warned about it in the papers yesterday. Washington has been in very close touch throughout this crisis with Israel, So I don't think there's any real blame being placed on the U.S. about this. I talked to the mayor of Tel Aviv, Shlomo Lahat, earlier this morning, and he said, I'm very proud that my government is holding back and being patient and trusting the Americans. There's still a huge reservoir of trust here for the United States, and unless something really bad happens, I don't see that being squandered.
They're also aware, aren't they, Bill, of course, that that missile, although it was aimed at Tel Aviv, was really, in a sense, had a political warhead and was really aimed at the coalition.
Absolutely. They know that if they retaliated now, they'd be doing Saddam Hussein a big favor, and Israel is not in the mood to do Saddam Hussein any favors at all right now.
Thank you. Bill McLaughlin reporting to us from Tel Aviv.
And for some more insight on where this all may be headed militarily, Bob McEwen is with retired Army General Fred Warner. Bob?
No, is the former head of the Southern Command in Panama. And General Warner, we've heard over the past week of the movement of men and material north. Intensified reports today of hundreds of tanks moving towards the border, of massive movements of men along the border with Kuwait. Does this mean that, having heard the reports we have also of a Frog missile being fired at Marines and them responding in Cobra helicopters, artillery near Kafji, that we are now seeing the beginning of the ground war we've been waiting for?
No, I don't think so, Bob. In fact, I'm quite certain it doesn't mean that. What it does probably mean is that General Norman Schwarzkopf is moving his troops into position to be ready to commence the land battle when he feels that the time is propitious for that. And that will take a tremendous amount of preparation to get those troops in position.
You know, they've been moving in that direction for the past week. When you talk about tremendous preparation, what are the logistical difficulties that likely yet remain for them?
Well, numbers to begin with, when you're talking about multiple divisions, and then although tanks can go cross-country, your whole logistical tail is frequently dependent on road nets, and you can only put so much on the road nets. But when we think of vehicles and getting so many miles per gallon, now we got to reverse our thinking, and we talk about how many gallons per mile. And then you add to that food, water, munitions, medical supplies, spare parts and all. It is just a huge job to get it in position.
And once all of that is in position, is it a matter of waiting for the word from Washington, the word from the Pentagon or the White House that it's time to go?
My guess is that it is not, that responsibility will rest with General Schwarzkopf. He has probably, from Washington, been given some very broad mission accomplishments. Remove the Iraqis from Kuwait, for example. And then within that broad guidance, it rests upon his shoulders to make the tactical decisions.
You know this man. He's a friend of yours. What is likely to be his frame of mind at this moment?
Well, first of all, he's impressed with the awesome responsibilities that he has. I mean impressed in a sense of seriously accepting the responsibilities. But at the same time, he's a consummate professional. I know him well. There is no soldier right now better prepared for the mission given to him than Norman Schwarzkopf. And so he has all the skills there, and they're kicking in. They're kicking in, and he's applying all that he has learned, bringing to bear all that he has studied, all the experience that he has had. But he is one very, very busy guy right now.
Does the fact that we now know Israel has been hit and that the White House has talked about retaliation for that affect his frame of mind, affect the way he's going to approach things?
I don't think so. I feel relatively certain that General Schwarzkopf fully anticipated and had planned for Israel being hit by some Scud missiles. He's probably surprised that it took as long as it did, because any expectations that you could have eliminated all the launching sites, fixed and mobile, is rather preposterous. So I imagine he is following plans that had long been set to react to precisely what has happened.
Yeah. It's interesting, Susan and Charlie, one assumes, I think, that in matters such as this, the word comes from above, from Washington, the Pentagon, and the White House. In this case, it appears, if what General Warner says is correct, the White House and the Pentagon may be learning what's going to happen from Norman Schwarzkopf. Back to you.
That spells trust, indeed. Here are the headlines at this hour as the Persian Gulf War continues. The Israeli cabinet meets, presumably to consider retaliation against Iraq. President Bush expresses outrage at the Iraqi Scud missile attack on Israel. The U.S.-led air assault continues on targets in Iraq and Kuwait, and U.S. troops and machinery advance toward the Kuwaiti border. Just when a lot of people thought Saddam Hussein had been neutralized, he struck. Iraq forces fired at least 8 Scud missiles into Israel tonight. 5 landed in Tel Aviv, causing damage to homes and buildings and leaving at least 10 people with minor injuries. No deaths are reported. And U.S. troops and machinery continue their march northward in Saudi Arabia, closer and closer to the border with Kuwait. Baghdad Radio today is saying the Persian Gulf War has just begun, though, and will not be a short one. And the Pentagon has released a photo of the first U.S. casualty of Operation Desert Storm, Lieutenant Commander Michael Spiker, officially listed as missing in action after his F-18 jet was shot down. Charlie?
Of course, CBS News continuous coverage of Operation Desert Storm will continue right after this.
Static Cling can make you feel like this. What's your solution? Static Guard. Static Guard eliminates Static Cling instantly, completely. Get Static Guard. It's your best solution for Static Cling.
All you needed to feel fresh then was baby powder. And it's all you need now. New Playtex Baby Powder Tampons.
I like gentle scent.
Playtex New Edition Baby Powder Tampons.
It's all you need to feel baby powder fresh.
This isn't what you think. It's a new kind of cold relief. Introducing fast-acting, better-tasting Tylenol Cold Effervescent. Strong non-aspirin cold relief from Tylenol. The only effervescent cold medicine that speeds 2 cold medicines to your sneezing and congestion while it sends Tylenol pain reliever to your aching body. New orange-flavored Tylenol Cold Effervescent, part of Tylenol's complete cold relief line. Nobody cares for your cold like Tylenol Cold.
A new American cheese snack idea. Grill it up and slice it up so little fingers can pick it up. Cut it up, fun it up, guaranteed they'll eat it up. American cheese. Kids are up for it anytime.
Come on and lose that weight. Get your body slim. Lose yourself in the taste.
Dynatrim, the weight loss plan from the makers of Centrum. Just blend for a delicious shake. Blend longer for a creamy mousse. Or freeze it for a frozen treat. Come on, lose yourself in the taste.
More delicious ways to lose it. Shake it, freeze it, creamy mousse it. You've never been so thin. Introducing Dynatrim. Lose yourself in the taste.
I'm a second-half quarterback.
That was a stellar performance.
15 pieces of chicken or a supersized bucket of hot wings, just $9.99 each.
Anytime you're ready, gentlemen.
Super buckets from KFC.
Come on, Dad.
One of the key unknowns in all of the equation of the Persian Gulf War is whether Israel will retaliate. The Israeli cabinet said to be meeting to discuss that. We have 3 guests with us in Los Angeles. They are from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Dr. Gerald Margolis, Carol Pearl, and Rabbi Marvin Heyer. Thank you very much for being with us. We know that it's only, well, it's about 20 minutes after midnight in Los Angeles now. Folks, what makes you think that Israel did not do what one would think it would instinctively have done, and that is retaliate the very moment that the Iraqi missiles fell on Tel Aviv? Dr. Margolis?
I think that Israel has to assess the situation in terms of exactly what is going on in Iraq, be able to coordinate its plans. Right now, from what we understand, the Israeli cabinet is meeting now. So it's a matter of time before some kind of a judgment, some kind of an overall assessment is made of the situation. My own feeling is that at some point there might very well be some form of retaliation.
Carol Pearl, I know you have friends and relatives in Tel Aviv. Obviously, for anyone such as yourself, and I guess for every American, when they first heard this word last night that there were missiles, gas masks being put on, must be a very frightening thing to get this news.
Yes, it was very frightening, and it was very difficult
trying to get through to Tel Aviv today. I was unable to make any communication with family and relatives there.
Rabbi Heyer, do you think that the psychology of this, the very fact that you have to overcome what is your natural instinct, is this very difficult for Israelis at this particular time, knowing that there's a greater good here in just showing restraint?
For certain. You know, Israel, of course, is faced with a great dilemma. President Bush has assembled a coalition that has gone in and done the job against Saddam Hussein. And Israel doesn't want to be seen as breaking up that coalition. On the other hand, Israel has a responsibility for its citizens. I mean, there isn't any country in the world that I know of that would report a case of where 6 or 7 missiles were launched against civilian population centers and the government would do nothing. So, you know, Israel can perhaps afford, I don't know if they will conclude that way, but in this instance, because there were no fatalities, Israel may decide that in the interests of the coalition to overlook at this one time. But the government certainly cannot tell its citizens that tomorrow night, if another group of missiles descend upon Israeli population centers, that again Israel will just say we pass, because that's simply not logical and that's not good government looking after the welfare of the people of Israel.
So this is Susan Spencer. I was wondering from all of you, do you think that in the absence of another attack, can the government of Israel survive if it does nothing, if it decides to play the patience card for the moment?
I'm not sure what you mean, Susan, about the government of Israel surviving.
Politically, I mean, in the long, in the long term, not considering the immediate effect on the coalition or the effect on what we have ongoing now, but you know, also there is consideration here for the internal political affairs of Israel. Can that government last if it in fact does not respond?
Yeah, well, my reading of the situation in terms of Israel internally is that there's probably greater unity than we've seen perhaps at any time over the past decade. There is no voices really being heard of dissent. So whatever course the government decides, I think that it will have the will of the people behind it. The fact of the matter is that Israel has to also assess its situation not only in terms of the current situation vis-a-vis Iraq. It also has to assess its situation.
Dr. Margolis, Ms. Pearl, and Rabbi Heyer, thank you so much for being with us from the Simone Wiesenthal Center there in Los Angeles.
And CBS News coverage of Operation Desert Storm will continue.
We have a report now from Rita Braver, our CBS News law correspondent, on preparations that are being made against the possibility of terrorism in the United States.
American airports are on their highest state of alert. At some places, like Dulles Airport outside Washington, barriers now ring the terminal. Security guards check approaching cars. It began last night on orders from the Federal Aviation Administration. Within a few hours after the Gulf shooting began, police were swarming over passenger shuttle buses at Miami International. Now at all U.S. airports, curbside check-in is suspended. Only ticket holders are allowed in gate areas, and all baggage is closely inspected.
We'd like to know that luggage that is here belongs to someone, that there's a purpose for it being here. We're concerned very obviously about someone being able to plant something in the luggage.
Military installations all around the country are on alert, too.
I have instructed our law enforcement command and my local commanders to take steps to increase security awareness here at Port Sell.
And the FBI is stepping up investigations of Iraqis who've overstayed their visas. Late yesterday, issuing an arrest warrant for a man who disappeared after he was arrested by San Luis Obispo, California police last fall for carrying explosive devices. No one is taking any chances. In Beverly Hills, the bomb squad was called in after a suspicious package was discovered on Swank Rodeo Drive. A false alarm. In Washington today, security was intense. A new set of barriers was going into place in front of the State Department. But one question no one seemed able to answer today was how long this nationwide state of alert will last.
Until they call us off, we'll be here. And it might be more than just the shift here, but I don't know until later.
And the scary truth is that Middle Eastern terrorists are known for having long memories and biding their time. They might wait to avenge the U.S. attack against Iraq until America is no longer on full alert. Rita Brader, CBS News, Washington.
A lot of Americans find themselves feeling mixed emotions about what's going on in the Persian Gulf, but Arab Americans especially so. Harold Dow has a report from Dearborn, Michigan.
There were tears of sadness and more prayers for peace. These people are Iraqi Americans. They call themselves Chaldeans. They're also Christians. They are part of an Arab American community of over 250,000, the largest in the United States. When the bombs started falling in the Middle East, they left this Detroit community emotionally divided. Divided over whether to support the United States in this war. And there is concern here, concern for loved ones left in Iraq. And there is also fear. Fear for what the future may hold.
I want to live peacefully in this world. I want to have children.
Lebanese-American Alan Serini is worried.
I was in the military, so I was in the 82nd Airborne, I was in the infantry. I'm a little nervous right now because I think I'm going to be called up. And I don't really care to go. I'm a Muslim. And I don't think it'd be right by beliefs for me to go and fight my own people.
We have expected, and we do expect this kind of violence against Arabs, be it in language or in physical.
In a telephone interview with USA Today, publisher for the Arab American newspaper, Osama Soblani, says he expects trouble.
The emotions are so high and the feelings are so tense. People will get to express their feelings in different ways, and the bigot will express his feeling in a nasty way.
We got lit up by a couple SAMs.
Ike Al-Hermizi is one Iraqi American who supports President Bush.
The war is no good for nobody.
He left Iraq 27 years ago in search of freedom, better opportunity, and a better life. He found it all in America, but he had to leave 200 relatives behind.
And I wish the war will never happen. But everybody bend in their knee to Saddam Hussein to look for peace or to get the hell out of Kuwait, but he never did.
I guess everybody's trying to figure out why a man would fight a war he knew he can't win. I mean, was it pride?
He called pride. I don't. I call it stupidity.
We didn't have to ask this Iraqi-American woman why she was kneeling in prayer. The look in her eyes said it all. Harold Dow, CBS News, Detroit.
You know, Charlie, it's one thing to talk about the troops in the abstract and friends and relatives and so forth, but to be in that position must be terribly wrenching.
You know, this is such a big and diverse country. Of course, we do have an Arab population here. We also have a Jewish population, and there are people who are in a special situation, and the relatives of the servicemen in the Gulf. And there are the children who, as we've seen, have their own special reaction to this. And I think each one of those segments will react to everything that he or she hears in a different way, just depending on who they are and where they are, and we're all the creatures of our own backgrounds. And
in some ways, you're almost torn. I mean, you want every single shred of information, and yet this kind of compounds itself over time and becomes such a so difficult in some ways. We have one interesting statistic. The Associated Press tells us that the overnight ratings for President Bush's televised speech about the outbreak of war with Iraq had the highest ratings since the funeral of President Kennedy, higher than any other event since then. And that doesn't surprise me one bit.
No, but it certainly shows that indeed this was not something that Americans just thought of as another news story. I mean, this is something that we understand here, that we're all involved in a way. I mean, even if we're not in any one of those sort of special categories, nevertheless, I mean, these are our times, this is our country, and what's going on over there right now is going to impact our lives for a very, very long time in ways that we can't now know. Our CBS News continuous coverage of Operation Desert Storm will continue in a moment.
watching CBS News' continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Charles Osgood and Susan Spencer.
And here are the headlines in our continuing coverage. Iraq predicts a long war in the Gulf. Israel considers striking back for a missile attack. Allied planes bombard Iraq for a second night. And ground forces prepare for an assault against Kuwait. Iraq is saying this morning that what it calls the war between the good and evil will not be a short one. An announcer on Baghdad radio said, quote, Iraq's final decision is confrontation. It will be a long confrontation. The war came to Israel last night in the form of Iraqi Scud missiles. They were not armed with chemical weapons, but they did serious damage in Tel Aviv and elsewhere and caused about a dozen injuries. The Israeli cabinet is meeting at this hour to make the decision as to whether to retaliate for the attack. In this country, words of caution are being directed at Israel.
If the Israelis respond, put considerable strain on the coalition. I think that may have been the back of everyone's mind when you listen to Saddam Hussein over the past 3 or 4 months.
Allied warplanes left their bases for another night of raids on Iraq. Some of the American sorties were aimed at the mobile missile sites that launched the attack on Israel. There are also reports that a second American plane has been downed in the fighting. This morning, a subdued Baghdad woke from its second night of bombardment. And in Saudi Arabia, Allied armor and supplies are moving north towards Kuwait, massing for an expected ground assault to liberate Kuwait.
Charlie, Barry Peterson is standing by in London, where it is, I guess, what, 9:30 in the morning, Barry? What can you tell us from there right now?
Well, you're close, Susan. It's about 8:30 in the morning. In fact,
you had the morning papers in any case.
That's
what
right.
Can you tell
I'm
us?
reading the morning papers. We're told that British Prime Minister John Major has been up for most of the night, finally got to sleep late in the night because of the news from the Middle East. And in fact, his war cabinet is scheduled to convene in about 28 minutes, the special cabinet. There is tension here because of the reports of heightened military activity now coming from Jordan. The Jordanian military has now been put on its highest state of military alert since the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. 20,000 Jordanian soldiers deployed now along the 400-mile border between Jordan and Israel. The Jordanians say they're expecting some sort of an Israeli response to that missile attack, and of course Israeli jets would have to cross Jordan to get to Iraq. If that happens, Jordan's King Hussein has said he would have to respond, and that would open an ominous and very sad new chapter in this war. Now, it's just morning here in London, as we said. Most Brits are now learning about what happened last night. Headlines like these as they come to work: Israel hit by missiles, or this one, Saddam rockets blast Israel. There's a sense here, maybe not always clear in the United States, that the Europeans consider this their war as well. There is news tonight that the French had 12 planes in an attack on an ammunition dump south of Kuwait. Now, the French have said they will not attack Iraq directly. Iraq is an old customer of theirs, buying some of those French Mirage jets. But the French do want to be a part of this allied effort, and so they're attacking targets within Kuwait. The Italians just got permission from their parliament yesterday to join in this fight. Today, they report their first loss, a two-man Tornado fighter bomber. And the British say now they have lost a second Tornado. 2 more men lost in this war. The sense here is really not very much one of euphoria, Charles and Susan. It's really a sense that it's going to take a long time. The British Prime Minister and his officials being very precise and clear in saying there's a lot more of this war to be fought, and there may be some very heavy casualties yet to come.
Barry, we're hearing from Saudi Arabia. Correspondent Scott Pelley has seen massive amounts of equipment, material, etc., moving on the ground toward Kuwait. He is under the impression, certainly from what he's been able to observe, that a ground attack could come sooner rather than later. Have you picked up any information at all, or what is the general sense in Europe as to how soon this might happen?
Well, it's very clear from all the reports here that certainly there is movement. In fact, the British Defense Ministry is letting its reporters talk about some of that. But the word that's being put out here is that it's not going to be an imminent attack. That in fact, what's happening is troops are moving closer to the border, certainly getting ready for something. But they're not getting ready to strike anytime soon, that there's still a lot more air war left to go. And that's certainly the story, at least, that British commanders are being told about, because that's what they're telling their people.
So there isn't a sense that this is going to happen very quickly.
Well, you don't get the impression it's going to happen today, but you certainly get the impression that it's going to happen, and they're preparing for it, and that this movement is in fact part of the preparation. In essence, it's the beginning of this ground war as these troops begin to move closer and take up positions much closer to that border.
In a way, Barry, these governments are really not making the decision when it comes to this. General Warner suggested to us earlier that, in fact, it was General Schwarzkopf who was going to decide when the moment came for the ground engagement to begin. That would depend on his assessment of how effective the softening up process had been, this carpet bombing of certain areas of Kuwait and trying to get those troops in a position so that they will be vulnerable to attack. And I suppose that these, to some extent, these governments are like you and me, waiting to see what happens as far as that aspect of this is concerned.
I think it's very true, Charles, but I have to tell you the impression here is that the governments are very impressed. The Europeans, in fact, are rather impressed with what the Americans have had to do. The British are talking in great detail about the pinpoint accuracy of the cruise missiles, and I think they're somewhat surprised at just how effective some of these high-tech weapons are. So there's a great deal of confidence here because of that whatever decision the Americans make will be the right one, because so far the Americans seem to be doing pretty well in this conflict.
I was struck a moment ago when you said the government is letting its reporters report X. How restricted are British reporters in covering this war?
I think as much as the Americans are, and perhaps even a little more so. Now, the British had some bad experience. British reporters had some bad experiences in the Falklands in that war when they felt that they were actually lied to on some occasions or giving false information to pass on some occasions. And so I think they're pushing now for a little more truthful information, and the price of that may be that they're getting a little less information. So a lot of the reporting really is the mood of how the soldiers are, and in that sense, there's a real belief among the British soldiers, the ones that we see portrayed on television, that they're very glad that this has finally started. The men on the ground are well trained, they say, and very anxious to get going. So there's a real kind of a gung-ho spirit that's being reflected here.
Barry Peterson in London, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later.
Susan, a couple of our other colleagues who are in a couple of the capitals that are very, very interested in what's going on now as far as the Israeli decision to retaliate or not to. Peter Van Sant is in Cairo, Egypt's capital, and Bert Quint in Damascus, the capital of Syria. Gentlemen, can you hear me? Are you with us?
I can hear you, Charlie.
Bert, are you there?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Peter, let's start with you. The Egyptians obviously would not take it at all well if Israel decided to retaliate, would they?
Although they've sent some conflicting signals over the past 10 days, about 10 days ago, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak said that if Israel intervenes, Egypt will assume a different posture in the alliance. But then a few days later, he said that any country has the right to defend itself. And the feeling here is that if Israel had a limited response, for instance, a single bombing strike, that it would not affect Egypt's position within the coalition. But if the Israelis actually join the war, that would overturn the apple cart, and that Egypt would have to then reconsider its entire position within the alliance.
Bert Quint, has President Assad had anything to say about the possibility of an Israeli retaliation or what he'd do?
The Syrians are a lot more hardline, and their geographical situation as a neighbor of Iraq is different and more difficult. The Syrians are making it clear that if Israel attacks by sending its airplanes into Syrian airspace, the Syrians will have to react. That reaction would be undoubtedly to fire upon the Israeli planes. But I can't see Syria getting into a ground war with Israel. Their troops are facing each other in the Golan Heights. Syria talks a tough game and is much less forgiving than Egypt, much more hardline toward Israel. But I don't think they're going to fight Israel unless they really have to.
Excuse me, this is Susan Spencer. Do you think, though, that there is any doubt that this coalition would fall apart if Israel did retaliate?
You talk about the coalition falling apart, Susan. Right now, the coalition is important politically, but hardly militarily. The Syrians have 15,000 troops in Saudi Arabia, but they don't intend to move them against Iraq. So it's a political, an explosive political situation that we're talking about. The whole Mideast balance, American relations with the Mideast and so forth. But we're not talking about any real change in the war.
Gentlemen, both of you, we have heard a somewhat ominous report out of Amman, Jordan today that the Jordanians are on full military alert and have moved troops up to the Israeli border, presumably to discourage Israel from any retaliatory move. But if there should be an engagement between Israeli and Jordanian forces, what would that do? Say, Peter, let's start with you. How would the Egyptians take to that?
Well, there is very strong Islamic and left-wing opposition here to Hosni Mubarak. In fact, they threatened the president a couple of weeks ago that he could suffer the same fate as his predecessor, Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated by Islamic extremists back in 1981, if he was seen as a pawn of U.S.-Israeli policy. I think that if the Israelis get involved in a shooting war, then there's really a great unknown here in Egypt in terms of exactly how they would react. What is unusual here today is that the government newspaper did not even report this missile attack on Israel. The opposition newspaper reported it. The President Hosni Mubarak has not made any public comments yet on the attack. Reporters, of course, have been beating down the door trying to get some sort of comment as to what the Egyptians will do. But Hosni Mubarak is in a very tough situation. He has opposed this invasion of Kuwait, and the United States has rewarded him by canceling his military debts. But he does have this Islamic and left-wing opposition here, and if there is a shooting war between the Israelis and the Jordanians, then it does completely change the equation. And it's the best I think we can say is that it's up in the air as to how Egypt would react to that.
Thank you. Peter Van Sant in Cairo and Bert Quint in Damascus, thank you for being with us.
And CBS News coverage of the war in the Gulf will continue.
When I think of everything I put in my hair to make it shiny, more manageable, and all it took was a touch of VO5. Yeah, VO5.
VO5 hairdressing. A touch does so much.
Wow. I just tried VO5 for the first time. Yeah, the stuff in the tube your old man used for control. The stuff that's been around forever. Now I know why.
VO5 hairdressing. A touch does so much.
I like it smooth, I like it slow, taking our time, round and round we go, don't ever change. Seems as long as there's been slow dancing, there's been slow high. After all these years, don't ever change, don't ever change. 'Cause you know, The best things in life never change. I like it slow.
If you think there's a longer lasting shine than tough acrylic future, think again. For long-lasting acrylic protection, nothing outshines future.
The same medicine found in the prescription drug Motrin.
The same medicine found in the prescription drug Motrin.
Same as in Motrin in non-prescription strength.
The same medicine found in the prescription.
Did you ever notice that a lot of pain relievers seem to be saying the same thing? Well, if you want the same medicine found in the prescription drug Motrin, wouldn't it just be simpler to ask for Motrin IB? Non-prescription strength Motrin IB. You can't buy a more effective pain reliever without a prescription. Motrin IB. Accept no alternatives.
New Alpine Lace American Slices.
Tastes so good.
Low cholesterol and 50% less sodium.
Tastes so good.
2/3 less saturated fat.
Healthy and tasty American. Tastes so good. Alpine Lace.
Here are the latest headlines as our CBS News coverage continues. The Israeli cabinet meets in emergency session considering retaliation against Iraq. This after Iraq's Scud missiles strike targets in Israel. Iraqi radio warns the war will be a long confrontation, and Jordan has reopened its borders to refugees. Israeli Prime Minister Shamir called his cabinet into an emergency meeting this morning after being assured on the phone by U.S. Secretary of State James Baker that American forces will eliminate any further Iraqi missile threat. At least 8 Scud missiles were fired, 5 hit civilian areas in Tel Aviv, and damage is considerable. At least 10 people were hurt, no deaths reported. Following the surprise attack, Israel's ambassador to the UN said his country was at risk by not striking Iraq first.
About 8 to 10 Scud missiles were launched from Iraq against Israel. Some of them hit the areas of Tel Aviv and Haifa. It just shows what kind of risk Israel took upon itself when it refrained from preemptive strike.
Another of those Scud missiles was fired at U.S. forces in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, but it was shot down by a Patriot missile. Charlie?
A lot of our reaction to what is happening on an hour-to-hour basis in the Persian Gulf War depends on who we are and where we are. Bob Faw is with us to talk a little bit about that. Bob?
Charlie, throughout the country tonight, Jewish American reaction to the Tel Aviv attack was one of fury and of indignation. And while official Washington worried that a retaliation by Israel could possibly undermine the coalition against Iraq and might also clutter the skies over Baghdad, some Jewish Americans were already calling for an Israeli strike.
What we now have to await is the nature of the Israeli response, and I believe it will be a devastating one and will be helpful to our own American armed forces, because it will add something like 400 of the best planes and the best pilots to those already over Baghdad and other cities in Iraq, manned by American flyers.
Others who were angry about the attack added that they were also relieved the damage in Tel Aviv was so light.
So far, it's a sense of relief and exhilaration when you hear that a bomb fell on 12 bombs fell on 37 buildings in an area where there's 187,000 people, and it's a great relief to hear that it was such a minimal effect so far.
I think that there will be great anger about what has happened, and anger because it was preventable. We could have stopped this long ago, but we didn't.
This is the worst fears, I think, of Americans, and particularly Jewish Americans at this particular moment, but we're all in the same boat. We're fighting evil. Evil.
I think he made a very foolish move. I think attacking Israel was about the dumbest thing he could have possibly done.
Jews have been gassed in the Holocaust, and Jews coming under gas attack again is... Excuse me for a minute. It's almost intolerable. In any case, whether they're explosive or gas, I think the major question will be the extent of the damage and the extent of the casualties, and we don't we don't know yet.
Tonight, before the news of the attack in Tel Aviv, demonstrations against the war continued around the country. This one in downtown Minneapolis. It was organized by students at the University of Minnesota, some faculty there. Traffic was stopped for a while, and while minor skirmishes were reported, there were no arrests. This contrasted to San Francisco, where 1,100 have been arrested in the last 3 days. Other rallies are scheduled throughout the day today. The New York Times CBS News poll just out shows that Americans, however, in lieu of the last recent events, Americans who just over a week ago were somewhat divided are now wholeheartedly behind the presidential decision. 3 of 4 say that Mr. Bush did the right thing by ordering the strikes. Overall, the president's rating, his overall rating, has climbed from 64 to 86%. 57% who approved the way he handled the Gulf crisis a week ago. That figure has soared all the way up to 85%. There is, however, a gender gap, if you will, in these new numbers. While men say that targets in Iraq should be bombed regardless of where civilians are, and say so by a margin of 2 to 1, only 41% of women polled said so. Charlie?
Thank you, Bob.
Charlie, you mentioned women. Women in the past, in previous polls, when it comes to questions of war and peace, are generally more dovish, are they not?
Tend to ask more for patience. We're, in this case, more willing to let sanctions, economic sanctions, take hold. The question is whether the gap will narrow in some sense. It hasn't thus far.
And this poll was taken, obviously, prior to the attack on Israel.
Taken prior to the attack on Tel Aviv, but it was taken on the 17th, so it's as fresh as you get. One presumes the Israeli attack will harden those attitudes even more.
One thing we should say, we don't want to leave the impression, because someone there talked about, you know, how horrible the prospect of a gas attack on Israel or anywhere. But in fact, there was no gas warhead on those missiles. It was conventional warheads, but that's not necessarily any particular credit to Saddam Hussein. It very well may be that he is unable to marry the chemical warhead to the Scud missile. And he may not know how to do that.
Today, 2 of his ambassadors in Western Europe predicted an attack on Israel, and each, when asked if that would incorporate chemical weapons, said no. So one may assume, at least on the basis of those remarks, this was the plan.
Is it your impression, Bob, that I mean, some people who were against this war didn't want to go into, didn't want the United States to be any part of it, felt that the timing was wrong and all of that, that they're going to sort of, they're a little wishy-washy on this. They're going to be, you know, strongly against it one hour, and then the next hour, depending on developments over there, will be against it. I mean, there are some of us, you know, who are not hard and fast one way or the other on this whole subject.
It's a very close call, and I think what you're going to see, and the poll indicates this to some degree, as the cost goes up, as the casualties go up, as this thing goes longer, the attitudes that are in flux now, this ambivalence will continue. This is not an easy one. Even though there's a clear-cut villain in the piece, if you will, the consequences are so unspeakable in many ways. It's a hard call for a lot of people to make.
Thank you, Bob Fall. We'll be continuing to monitor the reaction of folks around the country, as we also tell you on an hour-to-hour basis what's going on in the Persian Gulf, as our CBS News continuous coverage of Operation Desert Storm continues.
To shed some more light on what today's developments mean for the situation in the Middle East, we have with us from London now Philip Robbins, Director of the Middle Eastern Program at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Let me ask you first, sir, how does U.S. defense of Israel change the equation that exists right now?
Well, I think there's been an enormous amount of cynicism towards the United States on the part of ordinary Arabs at the popular level in a lot of the states in the region. The governments have found it difficult to hold the line in terms of support for the multinational effort. So I think that anything which identifies the U.S. more closely with Israel, particularly in terms of coordination or in terms of protection, will make it more difficult for those governments to continue on the same policy line.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Do you then think that this strengthens or weakens the situation of the coalition right now?
Well, I think inevitably it helps to erode the position of the coalition and to help erode the loyalty of the Arab members of the coalition to the United States and to the leadership of the United States, because the more the U.S. is identified in a practical way as being hand in glove with the Israelis, the more difficult it is for the Arab members of the coalition to maintain a strong support for that coalition.
But keeping the coalition together is the primary reason that the U.S. wants Israel to retain from retaliation.
Yes, of course. I mean, there's a contradiction involved here. If Israel was to retaliate boldly against the Iraqis, then really it would be extremely difficult to maintain the coalition. But by taking this sort of move, incrementally we are making it nevertheless more difficult for the Arab parties to maintain their cohesion and their commitment to the coalition.
The Israeli cabinet is meeting right now to decide what to do. There are some voices in this country saying a country has a right to defend itself and must defend itself. And after all, you didn't defend us all that well. Some of these missiles hit. If you're a betting man, what would your bet be in terms of whether or not Israel will indeed retaliate for this attack?
Well, I think that the Israelis are in a difficult position because on the one hand, they don't want to embarrass the United States. They don't want to see the international coalition break down and the possibility of the pressure on Iraq subsiding as a result. But on the other hand, the Israelis do have to think about their long-term position in the region. They do have to think about how their moves at the moment will be perceived. And if the lack of retaliation by Israel is likely to be perceived as a sign of weakness, then that helps to undermine the Israeli position and ultimately Israeli security over the longer term.
Mr. Robinson, this is Charles Osgood. Is it your impression, knowing what you know about the mentality of the various governments over there, that as long as Saddam Hussein remains alive and in charge in Iraq, that there is really no way that this war can end? We're in effect saying that we will accept nothing except surrender. What does that do over there? Does it mean that we have to absolutely devastate that country before there can be an end to this?
Well, I think while the immediate public objective of this effort is to get Iraq out of Kuwait, nevertheless, I think that we are talking about the future government, the future regime of Iraq. As long as Saddam is around, I think there's a perception widely held within the international community in the Western world and amongst certain Arab parties that there can be no stability in that part of the world. He is too much of a gambler. He is too much identified with the old way of conducting international politics. But I think that if he can be driven out of Kuwait, then at least that will enable the present war effort to be reduced. It will mean that the chances of casualties will disappear. And that means that other factors, other instruments can be brought to bear to try to undermine Saddam Hussein's position inside Iraq. So the immediate question of getting Iraq out of Kuwait is crucial.
Can you see past this war, sir, to a day when, assuming that the coalition wins and that Saddam Hussein is not on the scene, that there can be, as part of the new world order that President Bush talks about, a new order in the Middle East and some kind of resolution of these long-standing problems?
I think there's a general feeling widely in the West, and I think even on the part of some of the elites inside the region, that there must be a new approach to it all, that there must be a serious attempt to address all the fundamental underlying problems in the region, and that there must be an attempt to try to establish some sort of security, some sort of stable atmosphere for the conduct of interaction among nations. I think that increasingly people are weary of confrontation, weary of conflict, and I think that they would welcome some sort of stable atmosphere, provided that that was established on the basis of some broad notion of equity and comprehensive justice. And I think that if this could be established, then I think many of the parties in the region would be willing to go along with it.
Thank you. I detect a faint note of optimism there, which we appreciate. Philip Robbins from London. CBS News coverage of Operation Desert Storm, continues.
This is CBS.
This is an important message for U.S. veterans discharged after 1940. Whether you served during peacetime or war and are currently age 50 to 69, call this toll-free number now for free, no-obligation information about a veterans-only term life plan that costs just $1 a week. These veterans' life insurance benefits are guaranteed never to go down, and they are available at the guaranteed rate of just $1 a week. There is no waiting period. Benefits are paid from the first day of coverage. Call this number now for free information about this $1-a-week veterans-only life plan. Remember, only veterans, their spouses and widows, age 50 to 69 qualify for this offer. Term life insurance for $1 a week. Don't wait. Call this toll-free number now for free information from Veterans Life Insurance Company.
You're watching CBS News' continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Charles Osgood and Susan Spencer.
And here are the headlines as our coverage continues. Israel considers striking back at Iraq. American warplanes retaliate for the Iraq missile attack on Israel. Baghdad Radio predicts a long confrontation in the Gulf. And Allied armor moves north through Kuwait. The Israeli cabinet met this morning to decide whether to retaliate for an Israeli missile attack. At least 8 Scud missiles caused some damage and some minor injuries in Tel Aviv and elsewhere along the Mediterranean coast. They were conventional warheads. They were not chemical weapons, as some had feared they might be.